everybody, it's Mike and Rich here at Anglers. Welcome back to our offshore week. We're going to go and talk about some line here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very important part of your gear, right?
100%.
You know, we spend all this money on fancy rods and reels. The most important thing is what connects you to the fish, right?
Exactly.
And making sure that you have the right connections. You know, we're tying the right knots, we're doing the right splicing, the right loops, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, we wanted to make sure that we spend some time during this event talking about line. Line's important. So there's a lot of different lines on the market, and when it comes to offshore, it gets kind of like it's a daunting task to figure out what's the right line. A lot of people, you know, they kind of get cautious about it because we're going after bigger fish. We're going after, you know, the fish are going to run farther than the striped bass that we fish for in the bay and whatnot. So having the right line, the right size line, making sure there's enough that's going to fit on the reel, all that. So, you know, historically, mono. We've just stuck with mono. We filled the reels with mono, and it's worked fine. But, you know, quite a while now, we've been using some backing materials, hollow core braid and whatnot, solid braid you can use. But I've always been a big fan of the hollow core. So we're going to talk a little bit about hollow core line, splicing, connecting your mono top shot. What is a top shot versus a leader? We can even talk about, we should talk about leaders as well. So leader material is always important. So let's just dive right into mono. Let's start on the top. So
what do we got here, Rich?
Well, we got a couple different ones. So we've got Superior from Suffolk, very popular line. We use that a lot in the bay, but it's also a great line for offshore. It's not a bad line at all. You know, your standard diameters as far as monos go, you know, just the general feel to it, it's not too bad. It's a pretty good quality line. If we make an upgrade from there, we're going to go to Momoe. So I'm a big fan of Momoe Diamond line particularly. They do make a couple of different lines, but the Momoe Diamond is a great line. It's really strong. Most monos are going to break above their rated breaking strength. It's just the way mono is. Unless you're buying an IGFA rated line that's going to break under for record purposes or certain tournaments. Diamond's the opposite. It's going to break higher, way higher.
Upwards of 200% the breaking strength.
The breaking strength, yeah.
It's great. Now, that being said, it is a little bit thicker than your standard mono.
Yes.
But then and most people would say, well, why don't you just go with the other mono if it's going to break at if it's the same diameter as 60 pound, the same diameter as 80 pound, then why not just go with the 80 pound? Well, this breaks, like 60 pound will break much higher.
Yes.
Much higher than your standard 80 pound would break at. So it's a lot better line, which is why I know you and I both love it so much.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, and like you said, I don't remember all the numbers, but 50 is going to break around 83. That's a pretty substantial difference. But I'm getting a smaller diameter line than if I were to put 80 or 100 on my reel. And so line capacity is always an issue when you're offshore. You hook into a big tuna, they start taking off. You want to make sure you have plenty of line. You know, some of these battles go on for long periods of time and you're going back and forth. You want to make sure you have good quality line and you have plenty of it. So big fan of the Momoe Diamond. Most of us like the blue. It matches most of the reels. It looks good. Matches the water.
Now, that's another frequent question we get asked. Color. There's clear, yellow, orange, blue, every color of the rainbow in monofilament. What do you prefer and why?
So I personally like the blue for the majority of the stuff that I do. I do like the idea of high vis for certain applications. You know, when white marlin fishing, I kind of do like that high vis line if you get multiple fish hooked up, which can be very possible. When they're up on the surface running around each other, it's nice to kind of be able to follow those lines and see before we get crossed. We can see what's going on and we can kind of attack that problem before it even happens. So the high vis line is nice for that. You know, for most of the tuna fishing, stick with the blue. I just think it's, you know, it's perfectly fine.
And not to mention, it does look fantastic on offshore reels.
It looks great on the reels. There's no question. But the TLDs or the Tiagras, they look great, right? And the gold reels, the black reels, it matches everything. But, you know, it does have a little bit of a stealth aspect to it. You know, we're out in blue water, so the blue line, it's a good theory. But yeah, you know, oranges versus yellows, that's really personal preference to the angler, to the crew. Some people find it easier to see one color over the other. So you just kind of go with whatever your preference is. Some people will, you know, alternate, like their 20s will be with yellow and the 30s will be with orange, so that when they're looking out there, they know which fish is whose and all that. That's all personal preference. I wouldn't go too nuts with it personally. I kind of like everything to match, so most of my stuff is blue. But yeah, as far as color, I think that's where I stand on that one. As far as like braid, so we'll jump from mono to braid. There's different kinds of braids. There's solid braid, and then there's hollow core braid. So we've got some Gen X from Momoe here. Power Pro's another great one. Berkeley makes a bunch of good braids, like the Blue Water Camo spider wire. So braids in the solid realm are great for jigging. So if I'm going after tuna jigging or any of my bottom fish species, you know, I'm going to go with the solid. Swordfish, if I'm going to be going after like daytime swords, I'm using 80 pounds solid because I want that really thin diameter, because we're dropping so deep. We don't want the current pulling any more than it already is going to on that line. So thinner diameter. You know, some guys even go down to 65 on that, just again to cut through that water better. But solids where you want to go on that. Color on that, personal preference.
I was gonna say it's all personal preference at that.
Yeah, some people like that stealthy kind of color, like the blue water camos or a blue line, maybe a darker color line. It's not going to pop as easy. I'm coming from the same school of thought, though, with the other stuff. You know, I like that higher vis in some applications because, again, I want to be able to see where that fish is going. Leader's always your friend when it comes to that. You can put that high vis on and then just have a nice fluorocarbon leader in length that's going to give you your stealth.
Now, personally, I like the higher vis braids for wreck fishing, bottom fishing, things like that, because even if you can't feel the bite, you might be able to see your line tick or move. And I like this, especially this diamond solid orange is my favorite. Great line, be able to see it. So
yeah, I completely agree, especially if you're fishing. I mean, usually if you're wreck fishing, there's more than one of us on the boat that have a line in the water. Those fish, the drift, the fish running around, whatever it may be, you just, again, help avoid tangles before they happen. So, you know, having that solid color or those brighter colors is definitely going to be beneficial. So let's move to hollow core, hollow braids. So hollow braids are going to be Spectra. They're going to be the same material that most of the braids, the solid braids, are made out of, but it's woven in a much higher strand count, so it allows for it to be hollow, and it is 100% hollow. This line will actually open up and allow you to feed the line into it, which is pretty cool. So we'll get into some splicing in a minute here, but what's the advantage to hollow core? The connection. Being able to connect, there's no knots when we're tying this together. We're not even tying it.
it's like a Chinese finger trap.
Exactly. It's exactly how it works. So
It
you've
gets
got
tighter the harder you pull.
right. You got all those strands that open up and allow the monitor to go in, and as you pull, it just constricts it. So that's a really nice transition going in and out of your guides, going on and off of the reel. It just makes for a nice smoother transition. There is some added expense to doing this. So hollow core line is generally a little more expensive than your solid braids. But here's the beauty. It's just like braid on your spinning reels or your conventional reels in the bay. It sounds cliche, but it's an investment. The hollow core line is braid. It doesn't stretch. It doesn't have any memory. It's going to last you a long time. And unless you're using that braid consistently on fish where wear would become an issue, you're going to have it on that reel for a pretty long time. And when you change your line every year, every other year, you're not changing the hollow core braid.
You're just changing the mono on top.
You're changing the mono on top. So you're not re-spooling the entire reel. You're doing the first 200 yards, 100 yards, however many yards of mono you have. So that braid's going to last you a long time. So you spend a lot of money on it in the up front, but over time, it pays for itself. And the other advantage to using it is smaller diameter. So I'm still fishing line capacity. I'm still fishing with mono because I've got mono on top. But when the fish does run, I've got plenty of line. This allows me to run heavier line. So on a 50, I can put 80-pound test, and instead of a TLD 50 is going to hold around 400 to 450 yards of 80-pound mono, depending on whose mono you use. That's not a bad amount of line, but I would like to have a little bit more. I could downsize in my pound test and get more line, but then I sacrifice strength. If I go to hollow core to mono, I can get 400 yards of 130-pound hollow core with 200 yards of 80-pound Momoe diamond on top.
That's a lot of line.
Well,
That
yeah.
is that's perfect.
So yeah, I've gone to 600 yards with 80 pounds still being my weakest line. And I've got a nice smooth transition that goes in and out of the guide. So I think it's really worth it to do. I think it is a great investment. I think it's definitely something that any of the tuna fishermen out there should definitely consider.
Yep. All right, so we're gonna dive into showing some splicing.
Yeah, so let's talk about connections. Let's
What are we using here? The Daho rigging needles.
So most of us use Daho needles. There's some other needles on the market, but Daho is the most popular. They're the most readily available. Daho does a great job of making these in a wide assortment of sizes. So the cool thing about these needles, I'll try to pick up a big one here that's easy for you guys to see at home. The end that you would put into the braid is rounded. It's not a pointy needle, so you don't have to worry about it stabbing you. It's smooth and rounded, so it'll go through the braid without messing it up. But it's actually hollow, so if we go to the other end here, you'll see that the needle's actually hollow, which allows the mono to go inside of the needle, and it'll go all the way up inside of the needle. So it makes splicing really easy and seamless. They make these in a variety of different sizes to cover a variety of different size monos. And you definitely want to try these out. So if you need to buy a needle, bring in a section of line. We know most of the ones that are going to fit, but if you bring in a little small section of the line that you need, we can try them in the needles, make sure they fit. But yeah, so you're going to basically start out by, let's grab some monos. So we've got some 80-pound Mamoe, and I've already pre-selected the needle that's going to fit. So I'm going to show one little tip here. So when we go to put...
Great tip, by the way.
Yeah, so when we go to put this in, we're going to feed that line into the needle.
Might want to trim it. There we go.
Yeah, got it. So if the line is really tight, then you don't have to worry about it. If it fits good, it's going to stay in the needle. But if it's really sloppy and it comes out too easy, my little trick is I just take the line and I bend it. I put a little kink in the line like that, and that will make it a lot harder to slide into the needle, so that when I'm splicing and the braid's going over top, I won't accidentally pull that mono out of the needle during the splice. It just makes me have to redo it again. But I slide that all the way up, and so now the needle is on the end of the mono. So we're ready to start our splice. To start the splice, it's pretty easy. We're going to take our braid. We're going to find the end here. And so I just mushroom the end a little bit. You take the end of the needle, find the middle of this. Takes a little going, but once you get it in there, and you can see that the braid will slide right into the needle. Now it's really important when you're using hollow core line that you use soft, gentle touches with this. This is a woven material. You can see on the needle here how it kind of opens up, it expands, and you can see those cross weaves in there. If you push on this stuff too much, you will pop the needle out of the side. You can actually kind of mess the weave up, and that can actually kind of compromise the integrity of the line. Also makes for kind of a bumpy finish, which we want to try to avoid. So soft, gentle touches. I'm just gently sliding this in. You'll notice that I extend my finger out, and that allows the line to be straight. I don't want to do this because inevitably I'm putting pressure and hinging here. That's going to make the needle pop out. Again, it'll mess the weave up. So I just keep my finger here, allowing it to be straight, and I just work in small sections. I let a little bit build up, and then I slide it down the needle. I just keep repeating this.
And slow and steady. You don't. It's not a race.
That's right.
You don't need to go super fast. Slow and steady. Make sure it's done right the first time and everything like that. So.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Take the time to do it right the first time.
Yeah. Now, how far, Rich, do you go with the mono into the hollow core?
So, there's a good debate about that. So, a lot of different people have different methods on how far they want to go in. I've noticed that a lot of places, that a lot of people that do this, they're going to go, maybe like 3 or 4 feet, 5 feet at the most. I like to go 8. It's a little excessive.
Hurt. It does not hurt.
Yeah, I find it's a little excessive, but I find that it just gives me better peace of mind. Most of the customers that I've dealt with this in the past really like the idea of having a little more in there. It's not going to increase or decrease the amount of line capacity. It's more time that you're using the needle. it doesn't take that much time. As you can see,
And
even
you're
going...
still going to have that super smooth connection no matter how long you go.
Exactly. As you
still
can
key.
see, it's still very easy to do, and you know, again, you take your time with this, but as you get, you'll get more proficient at it as you go along. Now, the one thing that I will mention is, again, you want to make sure that you're careful with this stuff, and that you'll see how it's starting to bind up down here at the end. When it's time to smooth this out, I do not want to simply come down the line hard and build this up too much, because it will mess up that weave. So what I do is I gently kind of walk this stuff down easily as it starts to stretch out. And once it stretches out pretty well and I get rid of a lot of those weird bumps and ridges there, that's when I'll come back up and I will come a little tighter and smooth it out nice and neat. And when you get done, it looks like the braid had just grown in size because the mono's inside of there, but it didn't change the look or the configuration of that weave at all. So once I've reached the mark, I'll measure this out. So I'll go from 8 feet from wherever the end of the needle is to wherever the braid ends over top of the mono. Once I've reached that point, I simply pop the needle out the side. I'll show you that again. Just pop the needle out the side, and now I pull the needle completely out. Once I see the mono, I stop, slide the needle off of the mono. Now at this point, I need to put that mono back inside of the braid. I don't want it sticking out. Obviously, it's going to get hung up on stuff. You can try to feed that back, but I just simply cut the mono and then just carefully back that into the braid, and then just smooth out that connection. And you'll notice that transition's almost seamless. You can hardly even tell. The only way you can really feel it, or really tell, is if you feel it. You can feel that mono inside, but it's a very smooth connection. And then I just cautiously smooth out that braid over top of the mono, and there I have my full splice to the distance that I want.
Now this will hold, but it can come unraveled. So Rich is going to show us the next step of serving the connection at the end.
Yeah, absolutely right. So this is strong. This is definitely going to hold. Like you said before, it's like the Chinese finger cuff. The harder I pull, the more this braid wants to bite down on the mono, and it's not going to go anywhere. But all I have to do is push this braid up, and now I've got all that slack and it'll slide right out. So we do need to prevent that from happening. The other issue too is this is a woven material. This is a freshly cut end, so it can unravel. We definitely don't want that to happen and going in and out of the guides. So we have to do what's called a serve. So I use rod wrapping thread. I just use a fly tying bobbin to hold that. You can use small pound test braid. You can use a bunch of different materials. I've found that rod wrapping thread seems to work the best, nice and clean. And you can also use the bow serving tools, and there's other tools you can use. I found that this is readily available for most places, and it's pretty easy to use. So there is a method where you can use a device to do this that has some clamps and holds it in place, and then you just wrap around that. I personally have found them kind of cumbersome. You got to take the time to put this in. I just do it by hand. So here's how I do this. I'm going to take this connection. I'm going to take my bobbin with a little bit of line hanging out. I'm going to extend the distance not too far, maybe 10 inches at the most here. I lay the tag end of my serving thread next to my serve, or my splice here, and I'm going to serve over the end onto the mono. Now by doing this, I'm going to pinch here, for me with my left hand, all of those materials, and I'm going to hold this next to it. Now using centrifugal force, I'm going to swing the bobbin and it'll start wrapping over top of the braid, the mono that's inside of the braid, and the tag end. I only do like 4 or 5 turns, maybe 6 turns. I stop. I grab that tag end and I pull to get rid of that little loop. And once that loop comes tight, get a snug pull, I stop. I pinch my wraps so they don't come undone. And I just kind of lift this tag end up and trim just the tag end. I can discard that.
Like a surgeon.
That's right. So now I'm ready to continue my serve. So this takes a little bit of time. There's a couple things to remember when you're doing this. A little goes a really long way. I want to extend the length of my material from the bobbin, but I don't want to go too far. Two things happen when you go too far. You start losing control of the bobbin and you don't get nice wraps.
Hit you in the face.
It can hit you in the face, absolutely.
That's happened to me.
And as you're wrapping, this is corded thread. It'll start to uncord, and that can cause a lot of problems. So short spurts will allow you to kind of keep control. I like to take the line and I just kind of wrap it around my hand so that it keeps it out of the way, and you're going to see why. I'm going to go ahead and just start. And if you keep constant pressure and a nice subtle swing here, this line does nice touching wraps right next to itself, and it just walks its way down the serve.
So mesmerizing.
It is.
It's just beautiful.
And when that bobbin gets close, I stop it, and I will advance the thread with my hand to have control.
And notice that I notice you're always keeping tension. You always want to pinch up there on the line so it doesn't unravel.
Yeah.
It keeps it a nice tight.
I don't want to have my hands out here because as I wrap, it'll pull. I want to have my hands close. I don't want that to move. I want to control every aspect of what's going on here. And so I will stop. I will advance a little bit of thread, and we're going to go ahead and continue here. Get a good swing going. And there it goes. It picked up right where it was left off. Now when we get close to the end here, I like to stop and make sure that I have enough line out from my serve tool to go all the way off of the braid.
And I know you like to do about a ½ inch, maybe up to an inch, onto the actual just monofilament itself, right?
Yeah, I don't want to stop right at the braid. I want to have a nice smooth transition going off of that. So yeah, I'm going to stop a little bit past that, but we'll go ahead and pick up right from here. We've met the end of the braid. We're kind of covering up some of those loose ends, and now it's right over the mono. And like you said, ½ inch to an inch, give or take, just depends on how much steam I have rolling. So here's an instance where I had a little too much line and I started getting some backlash. So basically what happened was, instead of it continuing nice and neat and over, it started wrapping back over itself, and I don't like that. I don't want that. So at this point, I'm actually going to unwrap those thread wraps until I've got my nice smooth transition, and I'm going to pull a little more line out and try to get a good wrap going again. This could be a little tricky. It happens, but with a little bit of practice, you can get it started right back up. And so I've gotten about where I want. I'm going to go ahead and just catch that, stop it. And so I've got my serve where I would like it to be. So at this point, my serve starts, it's a little hard with this white thread, but my serve starts here. It goes to about here where it comes off of the braid, and then the rest of it's over top of the mono itself, right where I've stopped there. So at this point, I'm ready to finish this, but I need to do a locking knot. So what I'll do is I'll pull off a good 18, 20 inches of serving thread, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut that. I wanna make sure I don't cut it too far that this goes back in the bobbin. And I'm gonna take this material, and I'm basically gonna do similar to a uni knot. I take this material, I keep pinched here so it doesn't unravel, and I'm going to go over top of the mono, and I'm going to wrap this 12 times around the mono. Now, at this point, what I'll do is I will grab the tag end, because I only have 2 hands. I'm going to grab the tag end in my mouth. Now, here's the tricky part. I want to pull this tag end away from this locking knot. And as I do so, you'll notice that it'll start to twist up, forming that knot. And you'll notice I'm going slow. I'm always going slow. I want to take my time, and I will start to help this twist And you'll see this all come together. And I'll tease it down if it starts to get kind of out of control. And at a certain point, this will start to get tight enough that I can let go of those wraps and I can hold this with my hand. And now I'm pulling and I'm twisting until this all comes together nice and neat, just like that. And now I just give this a snug pull. You'll feel it and you'll see it all come together. And at this point, I'm pretty much done. All I need to do is come in and as close and neat as I can, trim that tag in. I can discard that. There's my complete finished serve.
Beautiful. But we're not done yet.
No, we're not. So this is still susceptible to abrasion, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. We don't want to take all this time to do all of this, and then this thing goes through the guides a couple of times, it gets messed up. So what I'll do is I'll use Pliabond. It's a contact cement.
But pliable, hence the name, Pliabond.
Exactly. So I have in the past used super glues for this. You can use super glues. The problem with most super glues is they're going to harden. So when this turns, when it bends going in and out of the guides,
It'll
or
crack.
on the reel, it'll crack and then it'll end up washing out. Those cracks will flake off. So I take some of this stuff. It is very tacky, so be careful with it. It doesn't get all over.
It smells fantastic. No, I'm just kidding. It smells pretty darn bad. But
so you're just going to do a light coating. And again, I want to emphasize on the light, I don't want a lot of drops coming off of this. I'll get it kind of smoothed out, and then I'll roll the line around, and I'll coat the backside. I extend past the serve on both ends. I go a little over the braid, and then I'm going to come down, I'm going to go a little over the mono. And I want to make sure that all of those thread wraps from that serve are covered. And you can see this gets kind of stringy. You just want to pull that off. And that's pretty much it. If I get any drops like this, I can just kind of smooth it out a little bit. It is a little tacky, but that's just kind of the name of the game. This stuff sets up pretty quick. It'll set up in probably 5 minutes. Depends on how hot or cold it is. But we'll let this cure. It will not cure hard. Like you said, it's Pliabond, so it's going to have a little tack to it all the time. It's going to be flexible. It's going to be able to move, which is nice. But that'll help secure that serve so that it does not come apart. Length of the serve, we didn't talk about that. Length of the serve, 2.5 inches. You don't need to go too far. I just want to have enough that covers the end of the braid. I kind of like starting a little higher up. You could probably do it a little bit shorter. I also kind of like that little indicator. You're going to see the color change when you're on a fish from the mono to the white. I like to see that serve just because I like to keep an eye on it, make sure that it's holding up. You know, usually they do when they're done right. But that's pretty much it. That's a mono to hollow core splice connection. And you do the same thing with fluorocarbon. You can splice a wide variety of line sizes too. I mean, that's always a question that I get. Most of us use a 130-pound test, which is what this is. This is Momoe 80, the Momoe Diamond. In the 130-pound hollow core, I've spliced all the way down to 50-pound Momoe. And then I've spliced up to 130 into 130. It can get a little tight. You might want to go to heavier braid if you're using heavier lines, but I can get 130 in there pretty easy. But yeah, you can. They do make smaller. We do carry 80-pound. So on my 50s, my 80s, I would use the 130. On my 30s, 80. I would use the 80. A 30 TLD will hold right around, I believe, 350 yards of 80-pound test, with about 150 yards of 50-pound moment on top. So
which
again,
is great for a 30. Yeah, that's
yeah,
beautiful for a 30.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. With the right rod, and keeping the drags within appropriate range, it becomes a little tuna rod. You can actually successfully go after some of those medium-sized tunas with a 30 class reel and have that line capacity. I've got some buddies that fish 30 Tiagras, and they're putting the hollow core on there with the top shot of 50-pound Momoe, and it's a lot lighter for the guys that get on the boat that don't fish a whole lot and they can't really handle a 50 for a long stand-up battle. It makes 30s a much easier reel to use. So yeah, that's how I do it.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Rich.
Yeah, not a problem. Definitely, this is a service that we're offering now. you know, it takes a little while to do, so be prepared to drop your reels off. We usually can't do this right away because it does take some time. You know, your time's precious. We don't want to keep you here too long while we're doing it, so feel free to drop them off and we'll get those spliced up for you.
Now we're going to go over some leader materials, and then also the difference between what's a leader and a top shot.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big question. A lot of people always ask, you know, what I want a top shot on, and then we start talking about length, and it's really not a top shot. They want a leader, or vice versa. So, top shot is a term that was used by the West Coast mainly, and then we've kind of started adopting it here on the East Coast over the years. There's no like hardcore definition. It depends on who you ask. But a leader is essentially something pretty short. You know, like I would say probably 30 feet and under is a leader in my book. Anything over that that's connected to another material like braid, that's going to be a top shot. And top shots range anywhere from 200 yards to like 50 feet. And it just really depends on your terminology. But essentially a leader is something that is shorter, that we're using to hold by hand to wire a fish close to the boat. That's going to be a leader. Something that's going to attach your bait to the main line or the setup that you have. A top shot is essentially the ability to add more line to your main line, but it's going to be pretty long.
Yes.
So you know, top shots in the jigging world, we use a lot of top shots because we want to have as much braid as possible, so we get good you know, action of our lures with very little stretch. But when we get the fish close to the boat, we don't want to touch that braid. So,
Ooh, boy, no.
you know, and then on some of these head boats, a lot of guys use top shots because they're so high off the water, they're freeboard, they don't want to grab that braid, but the leader's too short, and so they extend it, and then it becomes a top shot. For us that offshore fish, where we're using that hollow core line, again, a 50 is going to hold around 400 yards of braid. So that mono portion we call a top shot. So we'll you know, if you're looking for that kind of line, you're going to say, oh, I want a hollow core, and I want, you know, talk to me about what kind of top shot I'm getting. We're talking about a considerable amount of line, 200 yards worth. So, you know, and the top shots are usually mono. It can be fluoro, but usually not in the 200 yard range. It's usually
a little expensive there.
Yeah, like you know,
and not necessary.
No, it's not necessary. I do not believe in having too much fluorocarbon. I think having, you know, fluorocarbon as a leader is fine. If I were to do a top shot for maybe, you know, tuna jigging or something, a top shot of, you know, 50 yards, okay, I think it's too much still, but, you know, something in that range, you know, like a full 25 yard coil or something like that would probably be fine. But yeah, I'm going to go a little bit shorter on the fluorocarbon.
So what's the difference between fluoro and mono?
So fluoro and mono, yeah, that's a big one. We get that a lot in all kinds of fishing. So mono and fluoro. Fluorocarbon is a denser material. It doesn't refract light like mono does, so it's going to have kind of a cloudy, ghosty kind of look to it. The light doesn't shine off of it. Therefore, that's where you hear the term invisible, right? You know, I use fluorocarbon because it's invisible. It's not invisible. We can still see it in the water. The fish can still see it. It's just a lot harder for them to see, and it's not shiny. But the biggest advantage for me using fluorocarbon is the abrasion resistance. You know, when you're tuna fishing, yes, I want it as hard to see as possible. I don't like to use the term invisible because it's not. I want it to be as hard as possible to see. So I'm going to use fluorocarbon when I'm tuna chunking. Trolling, I'm not worried about using fluorocarbon personally. I know there are people out there that believe in it. We all have our thing. I think mono is fine. The boat's moving, the bait's moving, they're chasing after it. With chunking, they're swimming around that bait.
They have time to see that line.
Exactly. So, you know, the difference between fluorocarbon and mono, again, the abrasion resistance, the material that it's made out of, it's usually a little stiffer too, which is kind of nice. You have less coil in the water. But, you know, mono, you know, I think mono is what most of us use. When it comes to tournaments, we will tend to run more fluorocarbon than mono. You know, when you put money on the line, what's a coil of fluorocarbon when, you know, you're putting in how much to get into the tournament and the potential payout if you get lucky. So, you know, we'll definitely use fluorocarbon for that. You know, outside of that,
why don't we just go over some leader materials?
So yeah, let's talk about leader materials. So the different leader materials that I use, and that most of us use, and that we sell here in the store, is Momoe. Most of it's mono, but there's different kinds of mono too. So I happen to have some here. We've got some Momoe high catch. So this is not diamond material. This is kind of the standard high catch, but it's the leader formula for it. There is a difference between fluorocarbon mainline and fluorocarbon leader material.
100%.
And there's a difference between mono that's used for mainline and mono that's used for leader material. So you want to make sure if you're using leaders, you use leader material.
It's a hard mono.
Well, it's going to be a stiffer mono. It's going to have better abrasion qualities to it. Even though this isn't the abrasion resistance of fluorocarbon, it is more formulated to be a leader material. Plus, it's in a more manageable size. There's 100 yards here. I don't want to buy a giant spool of 100 or 130 or 150, 200 pound test for my leaders. I'm not going to use it. It's going to go to waste. These smaller leader coils are really good to use. We carry them in a variety of different sizes here. But there's also extra hard. So extra hard material is mono, and it's not fluorocarbon, but it is more abrasion resistant. It's also much stiffer. So we only carry this in a lot of sizes because we only have certain applications that we would really want to use extra hard for. 300 is around the size that we're going to use for our swordfish leaders. The end of the leader, not the wind-on. The wind-ons we'll still use mono for, and the wind-ons for swordfish are usually, anywhere from 150 down to 50 feet long, depending on your preference. That would connect your braid. That's your top shot. We call it a wind-on in that instance. But it's essentially a top shot for lack of better terms. And then from there we do like a 6 to 8 foot leader with our hook on. That's where we're going to use the extra hard, especially with billfish. If I'm billfish fishing, extra hard, because of those bills. The bottom of a billfish's bill, no matter which billfish it is, they're like sandpaper. The bigger the bill, the rougher that sandpaper gets. You get a big broad bill on there, it's nothing but a big giant sheet of sandpaper that's whacking away at that leader. The extra hard's going to help save the day. And then the 530 is my go-to for my blue marlin lures. For any of those big plugs that we're going to be pulling with a single or a double hook set, I go with the 530. It's big, it's tough stuff,
and it's hard.
It's extra hard.
Extra hard.
But it's definitely going to hold up to big blue marlin bills. I do like the feel to this technique, personally, when wiring a fish. So. Those are the extra hard. So that's the different kind of leaders materials that are kind of out there. There's other stuff. There's softer materials. Sometimes if you use a softer material, it gets you a little more action out of your lures. But I kind of lean more toward using the more abrasion resistant stuff, because I don't want to lose a fish. I want to hold on to that fish. It's funny. I always joke around. I fish every day like it's a tournament. Tournament fish, we up our ante. We use fluorocarbons. We use harder materials. We kind of fish a little differently. Where we fish on edge. I find if I fish that way all the time,
it makes
rig
it
all the way
easier.
there. And when it's tournament time, it's just another day on the water.
Yep.
Right?
Awesome. Well, thank you for everything, Rich.
Yeah, not a problem. Thanks.
Yep. Good luck out there and have fun.